Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. Rapper T.I. and his son, King, got into a heated argument and confrontation at an Atlanta Falcons game.
King, have you ever woke up with a roach on your face?
No, that's not the goal.
All right, then. So there it goes.
Or in your ear.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I got some in the neighborhood with me that broke up with roach in your ear. Y'all want to go to the bando in my neighborhood? Do y'all want to go to the bando? Do y'all want to go to the bando? To make him look better, he said that he know not true. Silver spoon, I ain't never ate with that day a day in my life.
You did have a silver spoon.
Look, I used to have to come to my grandma's house because I'm getting in the fight.
You cried like a baby to go to your grandma's house.
Every day.
You used to hold your breath and throw tantrums to go over there.
I don't want to be in these gates. I want to be outside in the neighborhood. That's why I want to be over there. But they don't understand that.
No, I'm going to tell you the reason why he want to be over there. Y'all ready? Because he can suck and pacify over there. He was 12 years old. He was suck and pacify. He was 12 years old. He couldn't do that in the house.
You cried like a baby. Hold your breath.
Yeah.
They try to say I was over there trying to suck a passy, but they ain't going to tell you everything. Like that. They're trying to hide it.
Ain't nobody hiding
Sugarcoat it. He capping. Hey. He know I stand on business. He know that. Ain't no nigga ever pulled my car ever in life. I stand on business. You drop me somewhere, I stand on business. You drop me in your hood, I stand on business.
I don't feel like you stand on business.
Yeah. I've been stood on business. I've been stood on business. You want to hide it for the world, I'm going to put it out there for them to see.
Hey, man,
I want to put up nowhere. You ain't had me put up nowhere. Like, you ain't had me behind the mansion. I was outside doing what I wanted to do.
You was behind there until you cried.
No, I got too much to drink. I drunk too much. Let's go. Now, get mad because we say the South ain't the suburbs. Then he want to talk about some other shit. Like this being sick. This being sick. No, I'm being real. You lying. You up here flagging. You're capping. You capping. I know you though. What's wrong with y'all? Why y'all doing that to me? Y'all know me. You know I stand on business. Why you even letting somebody play with me like that? Why you letting somebody play with me like that? Why you letting him play with me like that? No, ain't no joking. What do you mean?
You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing yourself. Hey, what is she talking about?
Get off me, get off me,
Well, you can't do nothing with me. Ain't shit you can do with me.
Now, in this incident that was recorded on an Instagram live stream, T.I. had brought his family to a Atlanta Falcons game, and they were sitting in a private box. And as they were sitting in this private box, this is where T.I.'s son, King, wanted to talk about how real he was and how he had come from the streets. Now, as King was out here talking about how real and how he was coming from the streets, this is where T.I. decided to step in and let his son, King, know that he didn't come from the hood. No, he came from a gated community. And as T.I.'s son, King, was embarrassed by his father calling him out on social media, this is where King started to get emotional. And as he got emotional, what happened was he continued to insist that he was supposedly a real black man from the streets. And this is where T.I. decided to talk about his experiences growing up poor in Atlanta. And as he talked about his experiences, this basically further embarrassed King, and King got even more emotional as his father then went out here and continued to admonish him. And further on, as he was being admonished, I believe one of his relatives, I think it might be his aunt or his grandmother, went out here and admonished him by saying that he was sucking on a pacifier until he was 12 years old when he went to the grandmother's house. And the only reason why he wanted to go to the grandmother's house was to continue to perpetuate the false narrative of being so-called real and coming from the streets. However, T.I. son King was basically raised inside of a suburban gated community and knows nothing of the struggles of poverty that his father knew. And as he was basically called out for being a fraud as related to being so-called quote-unquote real, this is basically what led to T.I.'s son, King, winding up becoming frustrated and eventually becoming angry and looking to get into a heated confrontation with his father. He wound up looking to get into a confrontation with his father because his father basically called him out on his lies on this social media live stream, and this basically shattered the entire image he was looking to project of himself being this so-called hood individual. And as he was having this confrontation with his father, things really got heated as his father looked to again assert his authority as a man. And as he looked to assert his authority as a man, this is where King basically started to really explode in this rage, getting up in his father's face because of the embarrassment he had as related to people on social media seeing the real image of him being this rich individual who was living very well, and that running diametrically opposed to the entire narrative he presented as related to the streets. Now, this entire incident regarding T.I. and his son, King, basically fits a pattern and profile of dysfunction I talk about as related to beta male fathers and their sons in my book, The Man Crisis. And it's clear to me that T.I. basically is a man in crisis from the day he was young. And sadly, what has happened is as he's gotten his success, he has basically passed on dysfunction on to his son. And the dysfunction he has passed on to his son is this whole false narrative of being so-called from the streets, being correlated with being black, and that the only way to have success as a black person is to so-called fit into this whole narrative of being street. Now, what T.I. and his son don't understand is that this whole idea of being so-called from the streets and so-called keeping it real basically is the whole mindset of being spellbound, and what you're doing is looking to fit into the black box that is acceptable to white people. And sadly, what has happened is because King and T.I. neither got any sort of education on how to manage their success from a father, what has happened is dysfunction has been passed on from father to son as related to this whole called keeping it real narrative. And the father passed on the whole idea of gangsta culture onto his son as related to being so-called a real black person. And this is why the boy is thinking being associated with the streets and being a gangsta is something that is a part of his identity. And that's all because T.I. wasn't really taught about what it really means to be a black man, and wasn't taught that as a black man, when you rise as related to success, your success is not based on the ideals of black that are created by white supremacy. No, the ideals of success are created by the Most High, and any father is going to want his son to rise to a higher standard and a higher quality of life, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a higher standard and a higher quality of life. And that's what T.I. provided for his son King, but his son didn't appreciate it at all because he had been indoctrinated into the ideals of being spellbound, where he's thinking about fitting into the black box that's acceptable to white people, and he's thinking that he needs to be from the streets and from the hood in order to be a so-called real black person. But what King doesn't understand that I understood growing up by watching media like The Cosby Show and having a working class father out here was showing me models of manhood that let me understand that what is real are the real men that I see out here putting in work to improve the quality of life for me. And when I saw men like my father and my brother out there, and I saw actual men, that made me understand that this was the real men out here, and the guys like Bill Cosby who were putting in that work, those were real men. And that's runs counter to the stereotypes that are presented in the mainstream media. Now, Madison Avenue in Hollywood, oftentimes what they do is they want to create these stereotypical images of black men and make you believe that this is real. And sadly, T.I.'s son, King, got caught up in this because his father was a rapper. And as he saw this hip-hop lifestyle, he never was taught that all of this was all a social construct that is completely made up so that young black boys will be indoctrinated into believing that these social constructs are all supposed to be what a black man is supposed to aspire to be like. However, all of the images you see in media are all completely fake. They are crafted by, in the music industry, A&R people, and they are also crafted by advertisers and media consultants who go out here and craft an image of a person. They craft an image of a person that's supposed to represent an ideal that they think will be appealing to people, and that is not a real person. No, that's a construct made to sell to people. And sadly, what has happened is T.I.'s son, King, has bought into the product, not understanding the reality he lives in. Because what King has done is he wants to be this gangster, he wants to be this thug that his father was presenting in his media, in the music he was in. And what the son wants to do is follow in the footsteps of the father. And even worse, he wants to be believing that everything he saw regarding his father is real. Unfortunately, everything he saw as related to his father was completely fake and completely made up. And everything that was made as related to his father, as related to being this thug and this gangster, wasn't real at all. And that's what has him embarrassed and ashamed of living this middle class lifestyle and aspiring to go back to the hood. He's thinking that if he is at his grandmother's house, he's living a real, authentic black life, but that's not an authentic black life at all as related to life, because black people come from different experiences, and there are plenty of middle class and upper middle class kids who are living a life that was provided to them by their parents. But sadly, a lot of those kids, they don't understand that the reality that they live is something that is authentic, and it's something that their parents work for, because what their parents wanted them to do was live a higher quality of life than they did. Now, as I was listening to the video with T.I. talking to his son, it really took me back to my days growing up in the South Bronx, living across the street from the Metro North Railroad on Park Avenue and 167th Street in a part of town that was worse than the projects. I mean, the building I lived in was worse than the projects. And I remember living in that 3-room apartment from the day I was born to about 1988. And when he talked about having a roach on your face and a roach on your ear, I'll take it up TI one more. How about having rats running around in your apartment? How about having water come down on you? How about having a plaster ceiling fall down on Christmas Eve? This is the kind of stuff I experienced growing up in that apartment, and that's the kind of thing that I live with. And that's where I could say, yeah, you want to improve your quality of life and you want to do better. That's what T.I. wanted to give to his son. Unfortunately, his son couldn't appreciate it because he had been indoctrinated into this whole social construct of being so-called real and wanting to go back to grandma's house to be so-called real when there was a far better life being provided for him by his father, but he was too insecure about his own identity of being black, and that's possibly one of the reasons why he was out here sucking a pacifier until he was 12 years old, was all of the insecurities he had regarding his whole identity of being black. And because he had these insecurities about his black identity, what he was doing was going out here to his grandmother's house hoping to get his emotional needs met, when in actuality what this boy needed was guidance and structure from his father to let him know that him being from this high-class lifestyle that he was living in, that gated community, was perfectly acceptable for a black man, and that his father was basically aspiring to help him do better. And that's what T.I.'s son needed in terms of guidance, and that's what he needed from his father, who basically was giving him a lot of material things, but wasn't giving him that guidance and counseling he needed in order to be able to feel emotionally secure about his blackness. Now, in addition to this feeling of insecurity he was having, he was out here trying to buy into these social constructs of being a thug and a gangster. That's why he's got this hairstyle on. That's why he's got the bling and the expensive clothes on. He wants to be this image of what he thinks is a black man, but he doesn't have any black men out here to provide him with proper guidance, because his father also bought into these ideals, not understanding all of it is completely fake. I mean, everything about that rap game is completely fake. Everything about this gangster rap stuff is completely fake. It's all made up by a bunch of white guys in corporate offices, and all they want to really do is go out here and breathe brand new life into old racist stereotypes such as the black brute and the coon, and they want to repackage these stereotypes to promote an ideal of blackness, but that whole idea of blackness is about fitting black men into a box that is acceptable to white people, and making black people fit into a world where they can make things smooth for white people and people who are non-black by providing them with an image that they find acceptable, because what they want to do is have their world smooth, where all they can see are black people as stereotypes. And sadly, what has happened to King is he's basically bought into all of these stereotypes. And what's really sad is that T.I. isn't in a place where he can go out here and give his son the proper guidance to understand that everything about this whole image is completely fake. No, because he's a beta male who bought into these ideals, he can't teach his son different so that he can go out here and live a better life. That's the great tragedy of T.I.'s story. While he worked hard to aspire to give his son the very best, he didn't give him a social education, And because he didn't get that social education, we have a boy getting upset about the lies that were told about him, about his life. And now that he's being confronted with those lies, he got upset because he got humiliated on social media, because he thought that everything he was living was the truth about keeping it real, but there was nothing real about that life that he was living. And his father was in a wet place where he couldn't really help his son, because he was out here thinking, oh, this is real, this is the streets, and he was living a life where he was keeping it real. But no, you're living inside of a gated community. You go to, or somebody drives you to your grandmother's house, and you get to live around people who are, you think, from the streets. And you're doing this, and what's really ironic about this whole situation, and what's really tragic about it, is that all of this is transpiring inside of a private box at the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. And this is the thing that flies over the head of King. You're in a private box at a Atlanta Falcons game, and you're talking about how you're from the streets, when many kids, when I was that age, and we never even got a chance at that kind of opportunity or a chance at that life at all. And many of us who were poor in the South Bronx, like myself, we weren't thinking about trying to show how real and from the streets we were. No, when I was in the place that T.I.'s son King was, my aspirations weren't about trying to show how hood I was, and I grew up in the worst part of the hood, in the area, again, across the street from the Metro North Railroad tracks, and my view from my living room window was a factory, and I grew up around abandoned buildings. So my aspirations weren't about trying to be street hood and trying to so-called run a block, because most of the block was completely destroyed. And my aspirations when I was King's age were about trying to go out here and trying to get my grades up so I could go and do things like be on the honor roll, things like I wanted to go out here and get a job in fast food or one of these stores, and I wanted to go out here and work on improving my quality of life. I mean, when I was King's age, I was focused on goals as related to trying to improve myself. I wasn't out here talking about running the streets or being some sort of image of being a street guy. No, my whole thing was trying to get myself out of poverty. And even when my family moved into a Section 8 apartment, my whole aspiration was to go out here and continue to work towards getting my grades up, trying to do well in school. And even after I wound up changing schools and I was working to get my diploma, and what I wanted to do, I was trying to do this, and I was running into the guys who were so-called real, the drug dealers, the thugs, and all of those different kind of guys. And I can tell you that what happened to most of those guys that King aspires to be like, most of those guys, they wound up dead, they wound up in prison, or they wound up in job readiness programs like I worked at with Strive, struggling to try to find a way to get their life together after a term in the penitentiary with Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles. And many of those guys were struggling overall. They weren't living a good life like his father romanticized in many of his rap lyrics. No, many folks were struggling, just like T.I. talked about to his son, where he said, you had the roach on your face. Again, I will one-up him by saying I had rats in my apartment and water bugs that were huge. I mean, these were the things that I had to deal with at Park Avenue, 167th Street. And this is the stuff that a father needs to be telling his son about, the realities of the so-called streets. Tell him about how hard it is, and tell him how it's how you have to deal with struggles where you're not only struggling with living in an apartment with no heat in the wintertime and no hot water in the wintertime, and you have to be in a room with an oven on. I mean, this is the stuff you talk to about your son with, and you tell him about all of the struggles. That's what you tell him with, and tell him that count his blessings, because God has blessed him with something great. I mean, God has blessed King, but King doesn't appreciate it because he wants to buy into a reality that is nothing more than a fantasy. And that's what's happened to many young black boys out here. I mean, I heard Michael Irvin's son was out here with the same ideal. I mean, you got Michael Irvin's son. This man is a two-time NFL Super Bowl champion. His son is living in the suburbs, but his son is sitting up here talking about how he's a gangster. And that's where Michael Irvin had to come in and check his son by saying, son, you ain't no gangster. No, you're not no gangster because you live in a gated community. You go into a private school. You don't know nothing about them streets. And since you don't know nothing about them streets, how can you rap about the streets? And that's the critical question that I gotta ask T.I.'s son and Michael Irvin's son. How can you go out here talking about you a gangster when you ain't never lived this life? You don't know this struggle. You haven't been in these streets. No, I'm a guy who does come from that neighborhood in that era. I come from that dark period of the late 1970s and the 1980s. I know what a hell that time was in New York City. I grew up in that era, and I can tell you from a fact that me and many of my classmates, many of us, we weren't thinking about going out here and being no gangsters. We wasn't thinking about being no thug. No, what we was thinking about was trying to work towards improving our lives. We were working to try to do things like get off the welfare rolls, working to get off the Section 8 programs, working to try to get ourselves our diplomas and our degrees. And we had to deal with a lot of foolishness from the neighborhood dope boys who would sit there and say, hey, you're acting white. But no, we had to understand that if we wanted better, we had to go out here and work for it the same way our parents were working behind the scenes, helping to get us to a higher level. That's what our parents were working to do. And that's what T.I.'s was trying to do for his son by taking him to that gated community. What he was trying to do for T.I. by taking him to that gated community was trying to protect his son. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to protect him from being indoctrinated into becoming a spellbound individual. And I believe what happened to King is that this basically shows a boy who has become spellbound. He's looking to fit into that box that is acceptable to white people and doesn't have a sense of a strong black male identity. And that's all, again, due to his father being a beta male and passing on dysfunction to his son, and him not having a proper model of manhood to be able to provide him with the guidance he needs. He nearly needs a man in his life, someone who comes from those streets, to let him know the reality of those streets, because most people who came from rough neighborhoods like I do, you don't want to go back to that hood. You don't want to go back to that lifestyle. You don't want to go back to them streets, because what's in them streets is not something you want to deal with. I know this from experience, from being in classes with dope boys, being in classes with thugs and gangsters. You don't want to associate with these people. No, you don't want to associate with these people because they will be a crab in a barrel that will bring you down. And what's really sad about T.I. and his son is that his son basically has a mindset just like those who have been indoctrinated into the spellbound mindset. And he's basically a guy who is on the way to being lost. And sadly, there's no man to tell him the truth like I'm doing right now. There's no man to sit down with T.I.'s son to let him know the reality. And that's what's the saddest part about this. Now, what happened at that whole altercation was we saw a complete breakdown of male authority, because what happened with King was he didn't respect his father's male authority, and because he didn't respect his father's male authority, that's where he thought he could go out here and put hands on his father. And that's all due to the dysfunctional way he was raised, because he was never taught to respect his father's authority by his mother or his grandmother. And because he wasn't taught to respect his father's authority, this is why he continued to escalate things to the point to getting in his father's face. And all of this led to the father basically being embarrassed on social media. And his father was embarrassed because this shows that T.I. is not a head of household. He is not a leader at all. And that's sadly reflected in the whole behavior of his son, who is basically at this point a man in crisis and a boy in desperate need of an intervention by seasoned men. What T.I.'s son and T.I. need are an intervention by responsible, conscientious men who will go out here and talk to both of them and let them understand the reality of black men, the reality of how black men have to carry and conduct themselves, and the reality of how a black man is supposed to behave. Because what happened with that whole argument between T.I. and his son reflected badly on T.I. and made him lose face, because if a son is out here disrespecting his father, that basically sends a message to the world that T.I. is a weak man. Now, T.I. believes that, it was just a heated altercation. No, what happened with him and his son basically showed that T.I. is a weak man, because any man who's out here, when you're out in public, you don't want, and you're a son and you respect your father, you may have issues with your father, but you will always look to show your father respect, because as a man, you know that the way you behave reflects on him, and you may not agree with everything that your father says, but you're going to show that man his respect. And showing that man his respect, that's something any son will do. But when a son isn't raised to respect male authority by his mother and his grandmother, what you see happens is what happened with T.I. and his son. And that really shows me a man in crisis, because his whole legacy basically is shown to be on a road to destruction, because his son is not in a place where he is on a course to appreciate all that his father has done for him. He's on a course where he's trying to go back to a place that basically almost destroyed his father, because T.I. has been in a place where he almost wound up like the late Tupac Shakur, with a lot of arrest. And now he's in a place where he's doing well. What's happened with T.I. is now he's dealing with the growing pains of a son. And I don't know if he knows how to guide his son, because this is a very vulnerable period for his son. This is a vulnerable period because you have a teenage boy who doesn't know what to do as related to being on the road to manhood, and he doesn't have any sort of father who can give him any sort of guidance. And that's even with all of the millions of dollars to go out here and be able to provide him with a gated community, and I believe possibly a private school. What has happened is you have a boy with an identity crisis as related to his blackness, and sadly, he needs the guidance of, again, a black man and who knows how things work. And that's what's not happening for him. He doesn't have that black man, so he's thinking black manhood is associated with being a gangster and a thug, not understanding that gangsters and thugs are made up social constructs by Madison Avenue in Hollywood. That's something that Dr. Dre and Ice Cube understand, and that's why their kids are not thugs and gangsters. But with T.I., he never had a man to give him guidance, And that's why his son is on the road to becoming a man in crisis. So when I look at this whole situation with T.I., it's embarrassing, but it's a situation that can be corrected if there is a intervention by men and an investment of men's time into this young brother. This young brother just needs somebody to give him guidance, because he's sitting up here talking about how he's real, when I know for a fact, as a guy who grew up in the South Bronx, none of what he's presenting is real. No, what he's presenting is something I saw back when I was at IS 148 in Park West. Guys who were these were the guys who were the Pookies and Ray Rays. These were the guys who were out here getting themselves jammed up with law enforcement. These were the guys who, when they got older, got jammed up with child support court when the girls they got with became baby mamas. These were the guys who had a hard time in life because they never had any man to set direction or set course for them or give them advice and give them the facts. And that's sadly what wasn't given to King. King wasn't being given the male life skills and male survival skills to know how to be a king. And that's one of the things that I got from my brother and my father, and I'm grateful and thank God that they gave me that. And as I studied the entertainment industry, as I was watching the Cosby Show and studied about the entertainment industry, because I wanted to go out here and create positive images, and I saw black men creating positive images like Robert Townsend and guys like Bill Duke and many others, and the Hudlin brothers, I started to see that black manhood was completely different than what was presented as related to the stereotypes that were presented in the 70s and in the early 80s. And I thank God that I was able to grow up watching that kind of media, and I'm thanking God that I'm able to pass that media on to the next generation with SJS Direct. And it's clear to me that T.I. really does need to read 2 of my books. T.I. really needs to read The Man Crisis because he's a boy in crisis. And I believe T.I. desperately needs to read Spellbound because he really needs to understand about the spellbound mindset, and he needs to understand that the spellbound mindset is destructive to black people. Those are 2 books I urge T.I. to go pick up because it's clear to me that he's spellbound and he needs to shatter the spell on his mind. He needs to shatter the spell on his mind because he has been bewitched by the witchcraft of Madison Avenue in Hollywood and told the lie that he is a gangster when he's not a gangster at all. No, like many of the fake thugs out here, he's buying into an ideal created by white supremacy. And the sad part is that while his father came from this, his father can't really give him the guidance that he needs to go on to be a successful man. His father can't give him that guidance because even though he came from those streets, he doesn't know how to set a course to go out here and do better, because you got a son out here, he's out here buying into all of these lies, talking about he's a gangster when he never came from that, don't know what that is, and is bought into lies that this is black when he needs to see a larger and richer picture of blackness. And like I did, because I had people in my life to show me a richer picture of blackness, and that's what T.I.'s son King needs, to show him how to become the leader that can become a king. But if he doesn't get that guidance from a man like myself and others who know better, what's sadly going to happen to King is he's going to go from being on the road to being a male to becoming a man in crisis. Now, I really recommend that King go out here and pick up my book, Man Crisis and Spellbound, and I also urge him to pick up Dondra T. Whitfield's book, Male versus Man, and really learn something about actual black manhood from actual black men who come from those streets. And I urge him to go out here and read those books, and I also urge you to go pick those books up. And all of those books are available on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. They are also available at other online booksellers in digital format, such as Smashworth, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about men in crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.